Hello everybody and welcome to another Inventor tutorial. This will be a more advanced tutorial as we will be stepping away from completely fixed dimensions throughout the entire final product, and we will be moving into a little bit of free-flowing design, more what you'd do if you were going to 3D print something and you wanted an aesthetic appeal as well as a set size limit. So today we're going to be making this little car in front of us. You can see we have wheels that will rotate in the final product, front and back, and then we have the body. The wheels are done as one piece with an axle and then two wheels. These sizes for the wheels and the axle come from a little wooden dowel and two wheels that you would get on a wooden train model kit from a hobby shop. And if you do happen to 3D print the final body, it should be pretty easy to put together. So we're going to start with the main body, and we have a lot of dimensions at the beginning. So as you can see, it's really structured because we need it to be a set distance in length. We need exact dimensions for the wheels. We need them to be spaced correctly, and then we want the rest of the shape to kind of fit together. But once we're done with that, we're going to be moving into two new tools, the Chamfer Tool and the Phila tool, and we'll be going over how to create the curves just to give it a nicer shape. And then you can add details accordingly, but the details don't necessarily have to be up to a certain dimension, and neither do the fillets and the chamfers. So it is a more free-flowing design. We aren't going to be using constraints the entire time, and sometimes we might be using the arrows for things such as extrusions to push and pull to whatever dimension we think looks good, as opposed to whatever dimension is necessary for parts to fit together. So we're going to start with a new part. So we're going to start in the YZ plane. As you saw, we're going to be creating this sketch on the side, and then we're going to extrude it outwards. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth to this original sketch just so I can make sure I have all the dimensions correct. You can feel free to do that as well. And I'm just going to flip this around so I can see it. So we're going to start on that YZ plane. And now we need to do the base. And then we're going to go up the side, and then we're going to switch over to the other side. We're going to do this for the front. Then we're going to come in and we're going to create kind of baselines for some dimensions so that when we go in and use the arc tool, it will fit with an exact dimension accordingly, and we won't just have to guess for placement. And then the spoiler shape at the back is going to come last, as that kind of depends on how the rest comes together. And then finally we're going to put on the roof. We can add the axle holes, and then we are finished with that and we can extrude it. So we're going to start with this base. We have 2 inches. And then for the rear, we're going to go up 5 and over 1/4. And then we can just bring that back down. And I'm not going to delete these 2 lines immediately because they provide a constraint so that this line will not move, which will be useful just in case anything shifts by either I accidentally click something or I change a dimension. It will now not change this line because it is fixed to those other dimensions. So now we're going to go over here. And I know I want this front to be a length of 0.4, but I want it to be at a different angle. I don't want it to be 90 degrees, I want it to be at 20 degrees from that vertical. So of course you can hit tab and then you can jump over into the second dimension, which will be the degrees. And if it's locked so that the distance goes all the way down to this line down here, then of course you have to add 90. If it's locked so that it goes over here, you have to subtract the 20 from the 90 and you would punch in 70. So depending on where it locks to, you might actually have to punch in a different dimension than me. For me, I only have to do 20. So 20 and enter. And as you can see, it now locked it first off, so that's at 20 degrees, and it's also locked it so it's 0.4. And then the hood comes back into the car a full inch, and then the goes up 1/8 of an inch. And now we can jump over into the arc tool. We are not going to be using the arc tool as a set radius of the arc. We are going to be picking specific beginning points and end points. But what we have selected right now is called a 3-point arc, as you can see up in the corner. So that means we click the first point, click the second point, and then our third point that we click determines the radius of the arc. As you can see, as we move it around, there is a dashed line and a dimension. That dashed line and dimension represents the radius of the circle that the arc is part of. So you could put in a set dimension, but we are not going to for now. So I'm going to wait for that to turn green so I know it's locked. I'm going to move over here and wait for that to turn green. And then I want it to kind of just flow up, and I want it to be about horizontal once it gets up here. And that looks like it's good, so I can now click. And I didn't put in any dimensions for that, so I'm good for now. And again, I'm going to leave in these two lines for now, just so that that line doesn't shift. So now for the front windshield, I want it to be 1/8 of an inch, but I want it to be at a different degree as well. So I want it to be 10 degrees from that vertical, so 10. And locked it in place. Excellent. Now I'm going to jump back over to the spoiler section. And we need the spoiler to hang a 1/16 off the back. And then we need to come up vertically, so make sure it is locking to the vertical. As you can see, going around here, it is kind of locking to other things as well. So if you just extend it up, it will lock to the vertical, and then by punching the dimension, it will come down to a different size. So you want this to be 1/8 in height. Then we want it to come in, again, make sure it's horizontal. As you can see, it's locking to 90.8 degrees. That might be an issue in the future, so I'm going to make sure that I change it to 90 degrees. But for now, we want this dimension to be 0.2. And then now it's locked to 90 degrees, so we're good. I'll press enter. Then I need this to come down. Let's see, how much do I need it to come down? I can jump back to my other just to make sure. So I actually don't have a dimension on there, which is interesting. So I'm just going to add a dimension so I can see it. And it's about a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm going to make it a 1/16 of an inch. And then I need this other line to come out so it can connect to the roof. And I need that to be at 1/4 of an inch. I also want it to be 90 degrees, so it is now. We're excellent. And then we can put the last curve on. So the first point is going to be the top of the windshield, the second point is going to be the back of that hood. And then whatever works. You could give it a nice bump, you could come down. I'm going to make it kind of smooth, more kind of car shape as opposed to cartoonish car shape. And now we need the dimensions so we can put holes in for the axles. So I am going to the midpoint of the body, which will be about in the center, and then you wait for the green dot to appear. And I'm going to click once, and I'm going to go up. Previously, we have been just placing the circles and then dimensioning to other lines afterwards. But in this instance, I just want to do it really quickly, so I'm going to start by just drawing lines, and then I can delete these lines afterwards the same way we've been doing with this line, this line, this line, and this line. So I'm going to go up, let's see, 1/8 of an inch. Is that correct? Let's check. Yes, it is. Then I want to go to the back, 0.825. And then I want to go towards the front, 0.825. Now I switch back to the midpoint, so it is going towards the front as opposed to just canceling this out. And then we want to put a circle at the edge of each of these. Now a little tip, because this is something that in the end we could 3D print, if you do happen to put an axle through a hole that is supposed to fit the axle but have the axle run smoothly, such as on a toy car where you want to be able to roll it around on the ground, when something 3D prints, the dimensions are most likely going to be pretty exact, but they aren't always, and you also want to give the axle a tiny bit of room anyway. So since we're going to be working with an 1/8 inch axle, which would be about here, I'm just going to bump it up to 0.15 just to add a tiny bit more room. And then for the other one, it's locked to the other circle, so it's the correct dimension, and we're good. And now we have all the dimensions that we have on this, and we have all the lines, and we just need to get rid of all these extra lines that you see. So just select them, delete, select, delete. If you delete some of the dimensions, that's fine. You don't have to delete every single line. I could leave these 3 lines here, but if you have lines that create separate shapes, such as this line and this line, which create a triangle, as well as the original shape, when you go to extrude it, you would have to extrude 2 shapes as opposed to 1. So I'm going to get rid of at least one of these so that it will recognize the entire shape. And now it should be good. So finish sketch. I'm going to jump back in here and just turn this off so that I can actually see everything. I'm going to hide that sketch. And so now we're going to extrude it the inch to give it its 3rd dimension. So let's make sure I can see it and extrude. I'm going to select that, 1 inch, that's good. And now as you can see, we have the basic shape of the car, but we don't have indents into the side. If you look at the one that we're going to be creating, the spoiler has been indented into the side, so it's smaller in width across. There's the same with the windshield. Then there's curves on the side, which we'll get to. And as you can see, there's this kind of curved shape in the back that we don't have in our original. So we're actually going to use that to create the spoiler, and then we're going to use that shape and we're going to cut in with the extrude. We're going to do the same for the windshield. So we're going to create a new sketch on this side, and we're going to project geometry so that we can use the points. And now I want there to be a kind of flat shape that goes across the front, and then it will hump up once it gets towards the back to create like a higher rear. So I'm going to start with a straight line from this back and come across and see where that locks to. And it locks to 0.999. Now I'm actually going to go to 0.8, and I'll tell you why in a moment. When I created this shape here, this was not a curve, it was actually a straight line going across. as you can see with the dotted lines, it was straight as opposed to the curve. And then using the fillet tool, we gave it that curve. We won't use the fillet tool until after we have created the sketch. So for now, we're just going to use the sketch, and we're going to give it another line to close the shape. And the same thing with the spoiler, we can do both at the same time. So I'm going to come over and come out to about there, just because now I can drop down vertically, and then when I give it a fillet, it will curve that over. I'm going to hit OK, and let's jump out and finish the sketch, and then we can extrude these in. So that's a full shape, and that's a full shape. We selected both of them because for time and simplicity, we're going to make them both the same size. We do not want it to be in a full inch. We want it to be more like, let's try 32nd of an inch, and let's try a 16th of an inch. I think a 16th looks good, so we're going to set that. And again, we're not going for full set dimensions anymore. It doesn't have to fit with anything, it just has to look good. So that's why I was able to pick the dimension. And now we're going to jump over to the other side, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do new sketch, but instead of projecting geometry of the entire side, we're going to project the geometry of the sides that we're going actually to use as shapes. So I'm going to project one cut that we made, and I'm going to project the other cut that we made. And now when we go over here, we have those shapes that we're going to use to cut. We don't actually have to give dimensions to those anymore. So just finish sketch. And now we can extrude both of those and then flip the direction, and it's already to a 16th of an inch. So that's good. And as you can see, we have the windshield now looks pretty good, and we have this hump in the back, and then the spoiler is taking shape. So right now I'm going to save it because this is a complex design. I advise you to as well. I'm going to new folder, and Widget 8. And this is my first part, so 8.1. And now we're going to try something. You can see that there's a different shading on this bottom part and this face, and that's because one of them is angled. We're trying to give it a car kind of look with the chamfer on the side, and kind of like the sides slope down a tiny bit. And once you start adding curves, it complicates the shape, so that when you go to add other curves or chamfers, fillets, whatever else you're going to add, the program can't always decide just what to do, and it will give you an error warning, and then it won't work. So you do have to think about order. I put in the fillets so that these sides were curved, and then I made the chamfer on this car. That meant that I couldn't get the chamfer to come up the side any higher than the way it is now. So we're going to start by creating the fillet that curves out the back. That would be this kind of curve here, where it loops around and comes back down. So the fillet tool, which is up here under the modify, and the drop-down menu gives you the chamfer as well. The fillet tool is a really cool tool. You select one edge, and it will create a curve around that edge to a set radius. And I, for now, am going to come up and make it so that it kind of curves around. And you can use it under exact dimensions if you need two parts to, say, fit together, and one of them has an edge that will catch on something. You can fillet it to an exact dimension so that it will fit smoothly, say with links. We could have done that on some of the previous models that we had. We don't need to in the program because the program doesn't have collisions, but in the real world you would have to use those. Most of the time though, you can do that directly from the sketch. You don't actually have to go in and do that once you've created the 3D model. So I normally just use it for the aesthetic appeal. If I'm creating something and I want it to look good, I can smooth over the edges and it will give a nice view inside the program. And if you're 3D printing something, you don't always want sharp edges, and you can fill it down those edges so that everything flows smoothly as well. So I kind of like that curve. I'm actually going to select the other side as well because you can do multiple sides the same dimension. So this time I don't have to go in and do one, finish the fillet, and then come back out and do the other. So I'm going to click check. And it still has this kind of sharp sharp edge once it hits the rear. So I'm going to do another fillet on that side. And as you can see, it comes along. I'm going to select the other side as well. And that doesn't look like it's selected correctly. Just go in and check. Maybe it did. Okay, it did. And I like that. As you can see, now it comes down and flows smoothly in so that it becomes tangent with this line here. So I'm going to hit check, see what that did. Yep, so now it has a nice curve all the way down and around. And it has that on both sides. So that's good. Now it looks good. And now we're going to try out the chamfer on the spoiler. So we have a chamfer in the front so that it kind of edges to the kind of goes around. We are not going to chamfer the back just because that would make the part really thin. If you do happen to 3D print parts, you can't have them be too thin. So we want it to have some shape in the back. And you can see we also chamfered the sides. So the fillet creates a nice curve. The chamfer creates a flat cut. So we can select the top line, and as you can see, it is giving me this error warning. That's because the dimension is too big. So if it were to create the cut would go partially into other shapes and then stop, and that would get confusing. So we're going to go off and to the side. We're going to use the arrow because we want it to go as far as possible. You can use the arrow to get there. So as you can see, it has now locked it to 1/16 of an inch, and it has given you kind of a ghosted version of what you'll get in the final product. So that looks good, so I like that. And now I'm going to select the other two lines because again I can select multiple lines, and it will actually fill out the entire shape to show you just what it will look like. And I like that. It looks just like the other one. You can hit finish sketch. We're going to hit OK. And now you can see we have this nice shape in the back for the spoiler that we have here. And now we're going to do the curves along the side, the fillets along the side, just to give it that smooth look. Because right now it's one hard edge all the way along, and we don't want that. So we're going to switch back to fillet. And I'm going to start by smoothing down this flat edge here so that it kind of flows down into the lower front of the car. So I'm going to select one. I'm going to kind of raise it up to about there because I want it to kind of come down and curve around. Then I'm going to go back over to the other side, and I'm going to do the same to the other side. And check mark. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a different thing over with the upper side because the upper side still had that sharp edge. And I want it to be a different dimension in the end because it is still doing a radial dimension for the curve. I want it to be a little steeper. So I'm going to come up to about there. That looks pretty good. I'm going to hit the check mark. And now it flows down in. Now, I could do it on the back of the roof so the roof flows into the rear of the car. I don't want to do that on mine. You can do that on yours. You would do that same way as you have been doing by going to the fillet and then selecting, and then you can use the arrow. So feel free to play around with that. I now want to curve the outer edge of this shape so that it flows along nicely like this. And we're going to go back into the fillet and select one. And as you can see, it's using the previous radial dimension. This is not the shape that we're going to want. So I'm going to bring this out to, it is giving me an error message. Right, so this is the problem with using fillets and chamfers at times. We have a really complex curve here. We have one curve that flows all the way around and then comes down. When you use the fillet tool, it wants to use the entire shape. So as you can see, I clicked on the other curve, and now it is creating a curve all the way around. This is an issue. This means that we should have done our other fillets in a different order. So I'm going to jump out. I'm just going to right-click to get the pie menu and undo. And actually that should be good because now I have this hard edge which breaks up one flowing line from the other. So now I can use the fillet tool on both of those, and as you can see, it creates the curve, but it doesn't go all the way around to the back. So I'm going to try to use the arrow to, okay, so the arrow is finicky sometimes and not quite exact enough. Right now this is at 1/16. Let's see what happens when we get it up to 1/32. So it's a little bit smoother, and then we still have that hard edge in there. As you can see, we kind of have that in the back and then curves around in the front. I'm actually going to go with 1/16 though, because I like what that looks like more. Then I'm going to make sure to select the other side as well and click the check mark. And I am getting a little bit of different shape than the other car, but that's fine. And we're going to fillet, and we're not going to fillet this side. We're going to actually see about chamfering this. What would that look like? So that would be kind of weird shape there. So we're not going to do that. And we can't chamfer that because that will also look a little weird. So you do have to, when making a freeform object, keep in mind that it won't always come out how you think it should, because the program will be taking into account other curves and other shapes. So we could go even farther back and we could get rid of the these fillets that we made, and then we'll have another section to break stuff off with, and we'll get this kind of nice curve on the side with a different curve up top. I'm going to try that just to show you what it would be like, so we'll delete those. And now you can see we have this other curve down the side. So I'm going to fillet this curve, and let's see if I get it right just there. You can see I just had to move the arrow around until it kind of looked good and clicked. And I'm going to come over and select the other side, check mark. And that's starting to look a lot more like this shape here. And then finally I did do a fillet up top. So I'm going to come back down and fillet out the side, fillet at the side. I think I had, what, 1? So yeah, that looked good, so check mark. And now the shape looks much more like what we had, on this one, where it kind of comes down and we have multiple sides coming together and flowing. You can select that plane and that plane. So we now, let's see what we're going to do. We're now going to add the details to the front that we have here. So it kind of looks like a face. I just thought of it as a bumper and 2 lights. So we're going to go over and new sketch on the front, and of course project geometry. I'm actually going to undo that so that I don't have that line in the way as well. You have to be careful, it will sometimes go to that outside. So for the face, and then I want two headlights to be centered, and yeah, that looks good. I can use that as a line. Now that line, I believe, is what is being projected from this line here. So you can ignore it, it doesn't actually mean anything. You can go back. Now that I've moved this shape, this is kind of an interesting dilemma. I've moved this shape, but if I use the front, it goes to the front of the 3D object. It doesn't actually align it back to this kind of diagonal. So what we have to do in this instance is go over to this toolbar at the side that you should basically ignore for everything else, except for this little icon down at the bottom, which allows us to, we click on it and then we can select a face that has been angled, and it will align to that face. So I click that face, and now we're front on with this face as opposed to front on with the car. So as you can see, it did kind of line up, and now we do have this line in the side, which has been projected from the bottom of that windshield. I'm actually going to use that, and I'm going to click at the end point and select, I want these to be about 0.1 and 0.1. So I didn't actually need this midline, but I also want to make, well, I want the bumper to be extruded to a different dimension than the two headlights. So I could make the bumper in the same sketch and then extrude the headlights first, and then go back and extrude the bumper from the same sketch. Instead, what I'm going to do is just make a sketch for the headlights, extrude those, then make a separate sketch for the bumper. It doesn't really matter either way what you do, but finish sketch, and let's see if we can select those. So select both headlights, and I want the headlights to be extruded to 1/16. Let's see, nope, definitely not a 1/16. Let's try 32nd, that looks better. And then we're going to go back and change those, but for now I'm just going to continue and go straight on into the bumper. Now again, project geometry, and we do have those two holes, so when it projects the geometry, it also projects the holes for the headlights. I want the bumper, of course, to be centered, so come down to the midpoint, and I want it to be a little bit up from the bottom, so about, let's try 1/16, and then I want it to come over almost to the edge, but not quite, so that looks to be about 0.45. And we want it to be how about a 1/16 in height, and then we can come over 0.45 times 2 would be 0.9, and as you can see, it locked to this other line, so it gave us a weird whack dimension. I don't know why it does that, it's really annoying, so we just have to undo and retry. Make sure that if you extend farther out, it will lock to that 90 degrees, or in this case 180 degrees. So 0.9, and now it's perfectly straight line. So we're going to come down so that it locks to the bottom. We're going to finish off that shape, and then finish the sketch. And we're going to extrude this to a different dimension. We're going to do a 1/16 of an inch so it sticks out a little more. Now we're going to come up, and I used the fillet tool to smooth over the headlights and the bumper on the edges. So we're going to do that here as well. So fillet, and you can select the entire curve, and you can select the entire curve. If you're trying to make a dome in this program, I found that instead of using the revolve tool, it's actually easier to just use the fillet and a cylinder. So of course in that instance you would create the cylinder to the outside dimension of the dome, and then you would extrude it to the height. The height being the radius. And then once you fillet it to the same radius, it will create a nice dome shape. Here, because of how it's set up, if I go around the edge, it will create almost a dome, but it won't quite get the center. So you get the idea. And I'm going to select OK for that. Now I want just the edges of this shape. And I want it to be curved all the way down, so I'm going to make this 16th. Although actually, that kind of looks good. We can play around with that and see what would look like at a half, what would look like at a quarter, 5th, 6th, 7th. So this is the free-form idea of you have one idea. It doesn't always have to go that way. We're going for the aesthetics. So let's try a 12th. I actually kind of like that. So I'm going to select that. And now I have the bumper and the headlights done in the front. And there's only one last feature that we need. And that's this chamfer on the side. Now, previously what we had been doing with chamfers was pretty simple. We would select one edge, and then it would chamfer, so it was 45 degrees, as you can see there. But this chamfer is not 45 degrees. This chamfer comes down, it's obviously not 45 degrees. It's much larger on one side than on the other. So we're going to use the chamfer tool to create that kind of cut in the side. So we're going to select the chamfer, and we're going to select the side, and let's see what we can do. At the moment, if we were to move this around, we would be getting the single dimension up top would be this dimension for the height and the base. We want a different dimension for the height and a different dimension for the base from each other as well as from this. So we're actually going to go over to next to the distance that we can plug in is this drop down menu. We're going to select two distances because we're going to be doing two separate distances. So I'm going to select the edge again, and as you can see it has remembered my dimensions from the previous shape, which is great and all, but it doesn't show you guys how to do it. So I'm actually going to let's see about messing these up and stuff. And you can click on the other arrow to move it around as well, though you might need to, yeah. Alright, so you can kind of move it around, and it doesn't always work. It sometimes kind of just sticks and it will lock between those two dimensions. It can be kind of annoying. So right now it's highlighted this dimension down here because that's the one we selected, so we know that's the base. I'm going to change that from a 16th to a 32nd, and I like that much more. It's going to be a steeper incline. And I'm now switched back over to the other, and I have pulled it up as high as it will go. Because of the curve up top, it's the same problem that we had with the fillet, where depending on where other curves are, it won't be able to complete the shape. It gets too complex, and the program just says, I can't do this. So we're going to pull this up as high as it can go, and it looks good anyway. So we can click the check bar. Now we have it on one side, so we need to go back and do it on the other side as well. So again, select the chamfer and select that edge. But as you can see, we selected the edge, but it put the dimensions in the wrong way. So what was our base on the other side is now our height, and what was our height on the other side is now our base. This is very simple to change. We go down to the two arrows and if you hover over it, it says flip distances. So we're going to click that, and it flips the base and the height, and everything is perfect. So click the X, click the check bar, I'm sorry. And now we have our final shape. I'm going to save this again. And now we need to create the wheels. This will be very simple. We're going to create the axle. Then we're going to create one wheel on the other side, come over, use project geometry to get the distance of the wheel on the other side. We're going to extrude that out, and then we're just going to fillet the edges to give them a nice kind of rounded look. So we're going to new part and start new sketch, and we're using a let's see, we're using an 1/8 inch axle, so 1/8, and we can finish that, and then we're going to extrude it. Now the car is 1 inch in width, which means that we need an axle that is 1 inch in length before hitting the edge of the wheel on both sides. Except that if we want it to have no friction in the real world, we would actually need the axle to be slightly longer. So I'm going to go from 1 inch to 1.04 inches. See how that looks. That's longer, but we don't need it to be that much longer. So 0.03, I like that. So hit enter. Now we have our main axle, and we're going to create another sketch on the side so we can do our wheels. And the wheels are going to be 0.625 in diameter. So click in the center of this circle. As you can see, I placed the center for the original circle right in the center of the crosshairs, so it already creates the center points nice and easy to line everything up. So now I'm just going to type 0.625 and finish that sketch and extrude that, and we need it to be extruded to 1/8. So we're going to extrude 1/8. Now we're going to come over to the other side, and we're going to start a new sketch in there. And I don't feel like creating another dimension circle, so I'm going to use project geometry, and I'm going to project geometry at this face, because if we do this face, we have the hole in the center, and we don't want that. So select that, finish that sketch, and extrude it. And now we need to fillet out the edges. So right now it's in chamfer. I'm going to go back to fillet. We can select one edge, we can select 2 edges, we can select 3 edges, we can select 4 edges. We can do all of them at once. Now 1/8 obviously is a weird size for the wheels, so I'm going to try 1/32, see what that gets us. That looks pretty good. It doesn't go all the full way across, but it does give it a rounded look. And finish sketch, and then I'm going to save this as, for me, 0.8, 0.2. And now we're going to create the final assembly where we put the wheels together. And this time we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to be using the joint tool as opposed to the constrain tool. This will be easier for the wheels when we go to center them, because we didn't make the axle an exact inch, so we can't mate the inside of one wheel to the outside of the car. We actually have to make sure that the center of the axle is aligned to the center of the inside holes of this car. But even if we were to use constrain, that would take a little bit of math, so we could get the exact dimension to the inside, to the outside. We would need to constrain the cylinder throughout the center as well. We're going to make this easy on ourselves by using the joint tool, and the joint tool will select edges of a cylinder or the center of the cylinder. And once you do that for multiple cylinders, it will lock those around the center line so that it won't move within, and it will also lock the center plane to the plane, the second plane that you're picking. So it's kind of confusing. We'll just click the center of one of the axles, and now we'll go for that center of this hole, which you can see is the dot in the center of that cylinder that lights up. But every time we go to it, we can't get to it. So if you hover over a neat trick, you hold down Control on your keyboard, and you can just move your mouse in, and it will keep this cylinder visible and allow you to click the center. And then it moves the axle down to the bottom, and it gives you a little animation showing just what sort of motion your joint now has based on what you've selected. If you go over to the type, you can see that we have cylindrical, which is why it was moving side to side as well as rotating. We don't want it to move side to side. We want it to stay fixed. So we're going to go into rotational, which means that it will now only rotate, and it takes a little bit to complete the animation, but you want to let it complete the animation before moving on. So that's good. So we're going to hit apply, and now we can go straight into the other one. So center again, Control. Once you get on the center, if you hit Control on, say, another plane, it will lock it to that plane. So we're on there, and we click the center again, and it's still in rotational, so now it's completing the animation, and we can wait for it to do that. We hit OK, and we're good. Now the joint tool also allows us to create animations, but we're not going to deal with that now. It's one reason why you would want to use it as opposed to the constrain tool, because the constrain tool will make sure that parts don't slide in ways that they're not supposed to because of the lack of collisions in the program. And then the joint tool will allow you to go in and use inspections and other tools that you might want just to make sure that your product works correctly. But for now, we have completed the car. And ignore the fact that there's no color on it. I did that just so you could see the difference between the body and the wheels. So, if you do want to 3D print this, because this is the catch, if you do want to 3D print the base, you wouldn't 3D print the wheels. If you wanted to 3D print the base, it's a little bit different for each printer, but most 3D printers use a standard of an STL file. So you would export to an STL file. Inventor saves to an IPT and other types of files, but doesn't save directly to the STL. So you actually have to export it. And we're going to export to CAD format. And now in the drop-down menu, you can see that we have STL files. We also have step files, which is another file that you can sometimes use on 3D printers. And then other 3D printers will have custom files, and they'll need converters. We're just going to try with the STL. And that's great. We have our file name. You want to pick the spot where you're going to export it to. The only thing you have to watch out for is the dimensions. Some printers will recognize certain dimensions, but not others. So if you say build your model in inches, like we did, and you go over to another printer that recognizes centimeters, it will blow up so that 1 inch is equal to 1 centimeter on the new program, and now you'll have a scale issue. It might not fit. Things will be the wrong size by a lot. So we go down to options, and now it gives us a set of options. We want to go to units and switch from centimeter to inch, because the main unit that we've been using is an inch, whatever 1 is when you dimension something. So if you dimension the base of the car and you get if you dimension, well, the hood, because that was exactly an inch. If you dimension the hood and it's 1 inch, and you typed in 1 so that you could get that inch as opposed to, say, 1/12. If you typed in 1/12, it would, of course, be a foot. If you typed in 1, it's an inch. A little bit of math stuff. Format, you can keep in binary. You can go in resolution. You might want to do high. In fact, most likely you do high unless your printer won't allow it. Exporting colors doesn't matter unless you have a printer that can do multiple colors. And then, of course, you have other deviations, edge lengths, aspect ratios. And we don't need to talk about all that now, but the main part is the inches and centimeters issue. So you want to always make sure that it's in the units that you normally use. Hit OK, and make sure it's at the correct name, and then of course hit save. And it will export it to an STL file, and now you can put that STL file into your 3D printer and print it. And a little bit of a tip, if you do happen to have a printer that does not have water-soluble support material, and you have a hole going all the way through your model, you're going to want to print it on its side so that it's in this orientation, so that the hole will not have print material in it, because print material is a pain to get out. So congratulations, you have just completed another Inventor tutorial, and now you also have a cute car that you can print out. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you continue to love Inventor, and see you next time. Bye.